Intermittent fasting is a hotly debated topic and a quite common default for a lot of high performers that are looking for a relatively easy solution to manage their eating schedule, potentially maybe for some weight management, or just look for ways to optimize productivity, maybe. In this episode, I'm going to break it fully down for you, what you need to know about intermittent fasting, how to apply it and how not to apply it. And so you can also in the end then decide if it might be worth a shot for you or not. So just to straight up go into it and break it down. Intermittent fasting, essentially, there are many different ways. The most common way is the 16-8 model, where someone would fast for 16 hours of the day and then consume all their food within an 8-hour window. There are also other forms, alternate day fasting, multi-day fasting, instead of 16-8, 18-6, which is even a bigger window of restriction. And it kind of makes sense. And a lot of the intermittent fasting crowd, it's almost a little bit of a cult these days. They claim it's good for anti-aging, for cognitive performance, for weight loss also. And there's a point in it, but we really have to break it down a little bit. So let's stick for this example with the 16-8 approach, which is the most common way. So what happens is often men that don't feel like eating in the morning, they just have some coffee, they delay their breakfast, their first meal up until 12, 1, eat then from 12, let's say until 8 in that scenario, and then just eat pretty much all their food in that window. So what it essentially does, what we have to understand is intermittent fasting is not a diet. Intermittent fasting is only a way of timing your food intake. It's essentially time-restricted feeding. So it only tells you when to eat and when not to eat. What matters the most, in particular to your performance, into your body composition, your health, if you want to see changes in your body, is what truly matters is what you eat, right? And a more even food distribution can make sense in a lot of scenarios. So I often see that quite often actually with people that apply for my program too, and they say things such as oh yeah, I've been doing intermittent fasting and it worked great for me. These are the same people who then walk up to me and saying oh yeah, I have 10 to 15 kilos to lose. So it's a little bit of a, if it would have worked that well, we wouldn't have this conversation in the first place. Can you lose some weight on intermittent fasting? 100%. No questions. If you limit your total time window where you can consume food, 100%. There's a possibility that you're going to restrict calories, and one form of calorie restriction will help you then also trim excess weight. Now, what is also important is, because let's stick with the example of weight loss or fat loss in particular, because that's the more important topic, because you don't essentially only want to lose weight, you want to lose fat. You don't want to lose weight in terms of losing lean mass, muscle mass, because that's a serious concern, especially after the age of 30 for every man. Because after the age of 30, you're going to start losing your muscle mass, on average 1% of your muscle mass per year, if you don't do anything against it. And intermittent fasting in often situations makes it very difficult to maintain lean mass and maintain muscle mass. Why is that? Because most individuals that follow this approach will have primarily 2 meals a day, lunch and dinner. If you want to make sure that you lose weight and that the weight essentially primarily only comes from fat tissue and not from your lean mass, from your muscle mass, which will have other problems that we can get into a second, you have to make sure that you're eating sufficient protein with that, because protein is the nutrient that is most important for maintaining our muscle size, next to, of course, training enough, stimulating your muscles, and recovering. That's a very important thing. So with intermittent fasting, if you only eat 2 meals a day, it can get very difficult to hit your protein requirements, because we can do the calculation right now. So let's say you would be, let's take an example, an 80 kilo man, right? An 80 kilo man let's say this is his ideal weight. Let's say right now he's at 90 kilos, but let's say 80 kilos is his ideal weight. So what we should aim for is at least 1.6 grams of calories, 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram body weight, right? So if you weigh, let's say your ideal weight is 80 kilos, you multiply that by 1.6, and that will give you 128 grams of protein that you should eat in a day. Now, if you eat only 2 meals a day, that would have to ask you to eat 64 grams of protein in a single sitting. That's quite difficult. That's like, realistically, you're not getting that in a restaurant. Realistically, it's very difficult to get that even when you're cooking yourself. As a reference, if you would eat all your protein from, let's say, chicken breast in that example, just for the sake of simplicity, you'd have to eat 300 grams of chicken breast alone. Who eats that, right? If you're not a bodybuilder, it's unlikely that you're gonna have that. So, and this is like only the lower end of range. If you wanna lose fat, you should not only have 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, but you should go closer to 1.8, maybe even 2. So let's say the same individual. Let's say he started out at 90 kilos and he lost his first 5, 6, 7 kilos. He gets closer to his ideal weight and also into a higher risk of losing his muscle mass. And with a higher risk of muscle mass, loss of muscle mass, you have to increase your total protein intake. So let's say his ideal weight still will remain 80 kilos. So if he would have to go to 2 grams per kilogram body weight, he should be eating around 160 grams. And if you would have that now into 2 meals, that would mean you would have to eat 80 grams of protein in one sitting, which is realistically very, very, very difficult. I mean, you can make it work if you're willing to have like a protein shake, an additional one with every meal that you're having. But for most people, it's very unrealistic. Now, if we take the same example again, like I said, let's go again to the example with 80 kilos, and let's go somewhere in the middle for this example with 1.8 grams per kilogram body weight. That will give you 144 grams of protein per day. Now you split that instead of into 2 meals, you split that into 3 meals, breakfast, lunch, dinner. And what you're gonna end up with is 48. So let's say 50. That's much easier than to get 80 grams of protein in one sitting. That's realistically. You can, if you eat 200 grams of, let's say, lean meat in one sitting, and then have some like additional foods with it, they will top off the protein a little bit. So it's much more realistic, and you will be at a way lower risk of losing your muscle mass. Eating 2 meals a day, you have to over obsess on your calories and in particular on your protein, because it becomes very, very difficult to hit your protein needs. And because it's virtually or realistically speaking, like close to maintaining that impossible, you're way better off if your goal is to maintain as much muscle mass, having 3 meals a day instead of only 2, right? That doesn't mean you need to eat a massive breakfast, right? I have most of my guys actually eating like a quite light of a breakfast that, like gives them sufficient protein, that sets them up for the day, that will also reduce their cravings, hunger, because what you eat for breakfast will have a direct impact on how hungry you're gonna be for dinner. And if we skip, or if you take someone that would skip their breakfast, they artificially, quote unquote, starve themselves in the first half of the day, and then are at a much higher risk of trying to compensate that in the second part of the day. And the problem that's going to come with that is, if you starve yourself artificially in the first half of the day, and then your body has that urge, like, oh, we didn't have any food, and we need to make sure we catch up. Especially if you imagine, like, you're going to have a stress day. Like your CTO is stressing you out, or the CFO is stressing you out, like you have a board meeting and a lot of pressure, and you have to make a ton of decisions. By the end of the day, you don't have the willpower to make smart decisions in most often situations about your food choices. So it's just you're gonna have whatever's gonna come in front of you. And being then able to like still say like, okay, I need to get enough protein and be able to like restrict myself to a degree, it just makes the whole fundamental situation unnecessarily difficult. Just unnecessarily difficult. If you would have a high protein, light breakfast first, let's say some low fat or zero fat Greek yogurt with a little bit of protein powder for flavor, because obviously like it's not the tastiest thing to do, and you top it off with some whatever fruit of your choice. I love blueberries, but let's say whatever fruit of your choice. You're gonna eat just enough to get you fueled, make you feel good, have enough protein for your first meal, not being starving, like going to a canteen and like just shoveling in your mouth whatever is going to come in front of you by lunch. And you're also going to set yourself up better for the evening. Because the big problem is, if you go starving into your dinner and you eat the majority of your food and calories in the evening, you're gonna eat so much food that your body is gonna needs time to digest. And usually, in often situations, it's not always possible to eat very much on time. Let's say 6 p.m., 7 p.m. or so. And if it gets closer to bedtime, a lot of food close to your bedtime will interfere with your recovery. And if it interferes with your recovery, you will be digesting throughout the night. Your body will not be able to restore itself to the degree that it should. And what it's going to end up is you're going to start digesting throughout the night. In the morning, you're probably still not hungry because you're still kind of digesting the food from last night. And you're going to naturally say oh yeah, I'm just not hungry in the morning. Yeah, no shit. Of course you're not going to be hungry if you've been digesting all night. And then it's kind of like this vicious cycle because you're not recovering properly. You're going to go into sleep, still digesting in the morning, messing up your recovery, needing 3 Nespressos just to feel normal, and then saying oh yeah, I'm not hungry in the morning. You see, it's a vicious cycle that maybe initially sounds like it makes sense to apply intermittent fasting in a situation like that, but objectively seen in almost every situation is not a practical strategy if you want to see sustainable change in your energy, in your body composition, in your health, right? Because eating too close to bedtime is one of the things that actually really wrecks up your sleep, right? So we should really, really be better off balancing our meals throughout the day much more, so you don't have to artificially, this is literal and artificial jet lag that you're doing, because you're shifting your circadian rhythm into the night because your body's still digesting, and instead of recovering, your body is still working. Your heart rate doesn't go as low as it should during the night, and your restorative capacity just plumps. Not a great idea. A typical other argument that you hear in particular from the intermittent fasting crowd, so to say, is oh yeah, it initiates autophagy, and they think they sound very smart if they throw out this word. Autophagy essentially is the process of your cell regeneration. So your cells have to essentially eat themselves and reproduce again. So you can continuously, because our cells are continuously rebuilding themselves. And with autophagy, and they say intermittent fasting triggers autophagy, and that's why it's good for us and it's good for longevity. The only problem is they looked at this exactly. And it's one of the main arguments that intermittent fasting people will bring up to you. They looked at this in studies very, very, very clearly, and they matched for all other factors and found out that fasting only works with autophagy if you're in a calorie deficit in the first place, because they put people, they did multiple studies on that, but in that particular study, they took 2 groups, they fed them the exact same amount of protein, carbs, calories, everything. One group was intermittently fasting, one group was having a more structured meal distribution throughout the day. Both groups lost the exact same amount of body fat by the end of the trial. And they had the same rate of autophagy, indicating that the argument for autophagy is irrelevant if you're fasting or not. It just needs, in the first place, a calorie deficit. And this is how fat loss works in the end. You don't have to count calories, but energy expenditure, how many calories you eat versus you burn, is the fundamental, basic truth of how fat loss works. No diet, if it's keto, low fat, low carb, intermittent fasting, carnivore, vegan, whatever, you name it. None of them will work in terms of fat loss if there is no calorie deficit in the first place. Very important to know. Now, another argument that is quite commonly is it is better for focus, because people report that they feel mentally sharper if they don't eat breakfast. and have better productivity, because in particular, you maybe too, you want to have better productivity for, especially in the first hours of the day. And that's why you decide to like, oh, no food, let me just have coffee. Because caffeine obviously is also nootropic, so to say, the original nootropic, meaning just like a cognitive enhancer. Now, funny enough, they also tested that multiple times. And in this very particular study, they put people into two groups and gave them an assessment, a test, so to say, to measure how well they're mentally operating. And they switched the groups too. So they did a very similar one with one group and then with the other group. And then one group first was intermittently fasting, then they had breakfast, and then they switched it, right? So they can make sure that it was not the test, but it was actually comparison. What we're really comparing here is the dietary pattern, if it has an influence. Subjectively, the intermittent fasting group reported better focus, better productivity, better mental performance. But when the study looked at objective outcomes of the test, they felt subjectively better, but objectively they performed worse. So the outcome of the study was essentially, they only felt like they were performing better, but when you measure it objectively with a test, they were actually performing worse than the group that had breakfast. So this again, like it's just like what makes you feel a certain way doesn't necessarily mean that this is also the truth, right? Because it's the same thing as like, because if you're going to the gym and you have a personal trainer and he helps you break a sweat, you getting a sweat doesn't mean you're making progress. It means just that you're sweating, and it maybe makes you feel good, which is awesome. But if you want to have true change in your appearance and in your body, there's maybe like a few other things that need to be looked at, especially your nutrition, recovery, and not only, that's the problem, like not only the hour in the gym is what really matters in terms of your progress and physical change, right? Now, with all of that in place, like, okay, Robin, now, like, so no intermittent fasting then. Like, what should I do? Look, I'll tell you exactly what you should do instead, and how I've successfully transformed hundreds of guys by following a simple framework that will help them stay mentally sharp, not having that, like post-breakfast slump a little bit, where you're feeling like full and tired and everything. Simple. Look, if you want to have the simplest solution, just have a protein shake and a piece of fruit and you'll be golden. If you enjoy a little bit more like actually sitting down and having some food, like I said, have some low-fat or fat-free Greek yogurt, add a little bit of protein powder. This is optional for flavor, but it is really important that you start your day with a high-protein breakfast. Like I said, because it's going to keep your hunger and your cravings throughout the day much more in control, and will reduce your risk of muscle loss, essentially, because that's like literally like one of the most important things. Like I said, resistance training, protein, and recovery are the most important pillars when it comes to maintaining your muscle mass and all of that. Because in the end, you just, like I said, you just don't want to lose the weight, because in the end, if you just lose weight and you lose the muscle with it, you're going to look soft, you're going to look weak, you're going to look like a flabby marathon runner. They no hate against marathon runners, like they do great stuff, but they don't have like the most appealing physiques, if we're honest. And if you don't want to have that either, then don't skip breakfast. Have your coffee still in the morning. So like my framework is, look, you get up, you go through your morning routine, you have some water before you actually have anything else. Before you have your coffee, make sure you have at least 500 milliliters of water. And then let's say at least wait an hour after waking up to have your breakfast, and you have, let's say, 200 grams of low-fat, fat-free Greek yogurt, add a scoop of protein powder to it so it also actually tastes nice, maybe 3-4 nuts, don't have too many of them, they're also like not the most productive thing for fat loss. Fruit, blueberries is my favorite choice, kiwi, apple, everything totally fine, no fruit is bad. And you're going to be golden, because it's going to fuel you to the amount that you feel better. It's going to fuel you to the amount that you're not getting tired, and you're not going to risk losing your muscle mass unnecessarily, right? It's going to make it much easier to hit your protein target throughout the day then. And yeah, What else is there to say about it? Follow this framework, have 3 meals, actually structure them into your day. That's going to be the easiest thing that you can do right now. To schedule your meals. If you wake up at 6, make sure your breakfast is no earlier than 7. If needed, bring it to work or have it on the way while you're commuting. Have your lunch around 12, 12:30 or whatever it is, and then have dinner at 6. And then just make sure, that's actually the last thing that I want to amp up. I'm a fan of reverse fasting. Not intermittent fasting, but reverse fasting. Make sure that you have at the very least 3 hours off a break in between your last meal and the time you go to bed. So let's say you go to bed by 10 or 11. Make sure that if you go to bed by 11, make sure your meal is finished. The very last by 8 p.m. Ideally even earlier. If you can get 4 hours or even 5 hours, that's even better. Because that's what's going to, in the long run, then actually help you recover better, have more energy throughout the day. The coffees are not a necessity for you in that moment. And it's also at the same time also going to help you improving your body composition, improving your health markers, in particular all typical things such as high blood glucose, high blood lipids, LDL-C cholesterol. These are not fun things to deal with. And we have a lot of power in controlling them. Weight reduction, optimized diet, a little bit of exercise, and you going to be golden. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel right here. Leave me a rating if you like the show, if you like the content. Also follow me on Instagram. Ideally, everything is going to be in the show notes. YouTube also, where we're going to have the video uploaded if you're listening to this. And then I'm going to catch you in the next one.